We could talk on a lot of topics, and we're going to fast run out of time. So I'm going to take you at a couple of points out of your remarks, and it builds on your last response. It seems to me, in leaving us with that marvellous quote from JFK in 1963, and your earlier remarks about where there are limits. And I heard you talk about there not being any limits on sunshine or land or education, but it feels like there are limits to the human capacity to think about the future and think about others in a system that has become so polarised, where we think about ourselves or our nation or winning an election. So my question is two parts, Jeff, and we'll need to get through it quite quickly, though. One is, who are the leaders that you're seeing emerging? I know you've got some favourite leaders around the world who've got that capacity to step up and think for others, bring others to think in that more global and in the future. And what do you say back to Australia? You started this in talking about us in this region, and I know you've got a view about us in the region, and I think the AUKUS comment links to how much we still link our future to the UK-US, and yet we live in a part of the world where our geographic future is here, and you pointed to that. So I guess the people that you see that could inspire us, but some reminders to us about the region we're in and the role that Australia can and should be playing as we solve these crises in a cooperative way.
Leaders come in many directions, and for reasons that I've just explained, national political leaders are one of many categories that one might look to, and there aren't so many national political leaders that I think are playing that role. My go-to guy right now for some guidance is Pope Francis, and as a Jewish kid from Detroit, it's a little unusual, but just to say that, you know, Pope Francis's idea is actually one humanity facing the real human needs of the planet. It's what Kennedy aspired to in 1963. Arguably, he was killed because of that vision, by the way, because there were rogue elements in the U.S. government that absolutely hated his peace agenda. And that's part of the challenge of making peace, which is that it's easier to kill a peacekeeper, a peacemaker, than it is to stop a war. And peacemakers keep getting killed, unfortunately, by those who don't want peace to be made. So Pope Francis has issued two encyclicals which reflect a long, deep tradition of Catholic social teachings. Again, I was not raised in that tradition, but those social teachings go back to my go-to philosopher, who's Aristotle, and I think he wrote the best book ever written on ethics in the year 230 BC, around that time, and the best book on politics ever written, and they were written conjointly, Nicomachean Ethics and the Politics. And the Church uses Aristotle through the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas brought up to the modern age. So without going into this, that's a moral leader. And Pope Francis speaks magnificently to political leaders. And he tells them, think, stop, you don't need the war. He was the one that said many years ago, we're already in World War III. He may be profoundly right, awful as it is to contemplate that. And there are many leaders around the world who inspire and want to do the right thing, and it's our individual job to do the best we can in doing what we have within our own capacities and our own responsibilities for this. And there's no shortage of goodwill. There's not even a shortage of good sense in the world. If the American government did what a majority of Americans want, we'd have completely different politics. because they would raise taxes on the rich, they would make the corporations pay more, they would have universal health coverage, they would act on climate change, and they would stop the wars. There's a large majority in favor of all of those things in the United States, but our political system is corrupted, as I said. So we need to speak out in our capacities. What I love about the Sustainable Development Goals is it gives us a language to speak, and it gives us a common language. And I can go anywhere in the world and talk to any government, and actually almost all of them know what I'm talking about when I say SDG 3. Yes, Professor Sachs, here's our plan for SDG 3, and that's very positive. And I'll quote President Kennedy, same speech, same idea. He was saying, we need to set a goal for peace, a practical goal, and for him, in 1963, that was the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And he said something very wise about leadership. He said, by defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly toward it. So this is a lesson in leadership. Define the goal more clearly, make it seem more manageable and less remote, and people will see it, they will draw hope from it, and as he says, they will move irresistibly toward it. And, you know, one of the goals that President Kennedy set in addition to peace was going to the moon. And he defined it clearly, and the whole country rose up and said, that's cool, let's do that. That was my childhood. Listening and watching every moonshot from Mercury, Gemini, Apollo mission to the completion of the mission within the decade that Kennedy said. So we need to make this fun too, inspiring, exciting, but especially help people to see what we're trying to do. And that can be leaders in business, it can be leaders in politics, it can be leaders in the Catholic Church or other religious leaders, and I'm very fond of the Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew, who is a great environmentalist. And the world will resonate to this. Our national leaders will probably come along later rather than leading. This is actually reality. And academics, especially if you have tenure, go lead, because you are privileged. Presumably they can't fire you. I'm testing that every day. But I think we should use our privilege to try to say clearly the things that need to be done. And that, to my mind, is where we as academics fit in.
Not a question, but it's, I guess, a reflection. I'm sorry, I almost interrupted you before. It was nice to see that the Nobel Prize for Economics only this week went to Professor Claudia Golden from Harvard.
Absolutely.
And all the work that she's done on women in the labour market. Exactly. And lovely to see a woman winning a Nobel Prize for Economics.
A long-time friend and an outstanding economist.
So it's good to see that new people, women particularly, are getting that acknowledgement. But also Najee Mohammadi, who won the Peace Prize this year. Of course, she's in jail in Iran as a protester. And you were talking about the fact that we can remove peacekeepers rather than stop wars. And I was just reflecting on the fact that Najee is in prison at the moment, receiving that Peace Prize. Would you mind just very briefly giving us this regional story for Australia? Because I just think, hearing you this morning talk about how we've got to get focused on how we can lead into the region and how important that is, I guess for our audience, just to take some hope that we can play a very significant role. You've said at the beginning of your remarks that we're doing quite well in the SDGs, that we've got good governments at all levels now that I think are really pressing, not just on SDGs, but on all the activities around climate itself. But we've not been great in really engaging with our region. We've lost a connection of languages with the region. Our young people don't learn languages of the region. And as you say, AUKUS has taken us back into a series of partnerships. Yep. Your advice to us about why the region matters. And I think, and you can't do it all in a couple of minutes, but China, you have a very interesting view on China, which again would challenge many people's view of this contest that's been set up, that China needs to be stopped and thwarted and is a bad actor, and your view is quite different at the moment, Jeff.
So let me start. We're all family. We're all part of the Anglo-Saxon world, and we speak English, and we are all inheritors of Britain. We in the United States, and you here in Australia and New Zealand and Canada, with some interesting differences, but basically we all live in the Anglo-Saxon world. It's a very interesting story, which is another 10 hours of discussion. A very weird world. In many ways, it made major contributions to the world, obviously, especially in science and technology and creating the industrial world. Unique contributions from Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton, the Royal Society, James Watt, and so forth. And that made the modern world, because Britain really invented the industrial age. And but it created two strange things. One was it created hegemony. The British Empire ruled the world in the 19th century to a large extent and just beat the crap out of everybody. Britain was more violent than any other country in the world in the 19th century. Went to war everywhere, often profoundly cynical wars like the Opium Wars, which are on my list of wars among my most detested wars. How can you go to war with a country to take your opium, for God's sake? And Britain did it twice. And the United States inherited that idea, and the U.S. has been at war most of its history. It had to defeat and in many cases exterminate the native populations. So we don't even, as I said, recognize what we have done. And then when the North American continent was finished, we went out to create an empire, and then when the British Empire fell, the American Empire replaced it in 1945. So the Anglo-Saxon world's a little bit strange because it's run the world for 2 centuries. The rest of the world's quite tired of that, by the way. Really tired of it. I see it every day in my professional life for the last 40 years. They do not want to be told what to do by the United States. But the U.S. cannot hear that at all. They think, oh, you want us to lead? Okay, we'll lead. No, don't lead. Oh, you want us to lead? We'll lead. And that's the endless discussion. So be careful in Australia, because it's a little strange, our heritage. The second thing that's strange, you don't have it as bad as we do. We got the laissez-faire bug to the maximum in the U.S. So we are truly heirs of John Locke. And Adam Smith was a very nice person, but also he basically said, let things run, they'll take care of themselves. And that view, Locke, little worse, which was the only legitimate government is a government that doesn't tax people, because the purpose of government is to protect their wealth. That's the American view. I am coming to understand that Australia is more influenced by Bentham than Locke, because you came later a little bit, and Bentham is a lot more civilized than Locke in this. But the Anglo-Saxon philosophy of the world, which is let her rip, is very convenient for rich and powerful people and not so convenient for poor and vulnerable people. And so I think we have a strange philosophy in the Anglo-Saxon world that we also need to reassess. Now, to come to Australia, you're part of the Anglo-Saxon world, and the U.S. wants you really in that grip, but you're also actually in the Asia-Pacific, which is interesting. It's a great part of the world. It's the most dynamic part of the world. It's the fastest growing part of the world economy. It's an extremely successful part of the world. And you should enjoy that and really be part of it also. So I'm a fan of China and a fan of Chinese civilization. It's a little simplistic way to put it, but it's been around as a unified nation since 221 BC. Statecraft has been quite strong for 2,000 years, very strong today, very talented people. When I deal with Chinese leaders and bureaucrats and technocrats, they are among the most sophisticated people that I meet in the world. They know their brief. They're doing a very serious job. You don't achieve 10% growth per year for 40 years as a, slacking off. You do it because you're really running things extremely well. Now, if you think about all the times that China invaded Australia in history, you would come to 0 in 2,000 years. If you think about all the times that China invaded its neighbor Japan, you would possibly say 1274 and 1281 AD, but then you would say, but that was actually the Mongols, that wasn't the Chinese. Other than that, never. If you think about China's overseas empire in that 2,000 years, well, that would be never. So we should understand we're dealing with a great civilization that does not have a tradition of transoceanic empires. It doesn't have a network of 800 military bases around the world like the United States. It doesn't surround the United States with its military bases in the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, and wherever else, in contrast to the United States wanting military bases every place up and down the South China Sea and around every border of China, and saying, why are you worried? So we should really engage with China. We should enjoy the wonders of one of the world's greatest cultures and civilizations, a breakthrough in economic development in the last 45 years. We should understand that China's whole lifeline depends on the South China Sea. So with the United States militarized up to the wazoo, maybe China has some security concerns that we should recognize and acknowledge. We shouldn't badmouth China for every good thing that it tries to do, including the Belt and Road Initiative, which is actually a wonderful initiative. The idea of the Belt and Road Initiative is that China will use its very high saving to help finance modern infrastructure. And Australia should say, that's great. We'll work together with you on that. We've got a lot of technology. We are going to provide a lot of clean energy. We can do all sorts of things. And ASEAN's your neighbor to the south. It's our neighbor to the north. We should be part of that. Well, the United States would blow a gasket. Biden had to call the Prime Minister of Italy into the Oval Office to be dressed down. You've got to get out of the Belt and Road Initiative. This is U.S. hegemonic thinking. So my real advice to you is work constructively in your neighborhood. Make partnerships, deepen relations. Monash has a campus in Suzhou, and that's fantastic. There's all sorts of wonderful things that can be done in this region. It's technologically extremely sophisticated, and it is, I think, the low-cost providers of the green industry and energy for the whole world. So It also gives you a nice vocation for the next 50 years of the next generation of Australia's growth. So, in general, by the way, my philosophy is be nice to your neighbors, and they should be nice to you. And the more you talk with them, play bridge with them, play whatever you do, play cricket or rugby with them, teach the Chinese rugby,
footy.
You'll beat them.
Yes.
But have a good time and chill out, and don't have nuclear submarines. You don't need them.
Jeff, it's just ticked over 8 o'clock, so we're going to have to end our conversation to let people get on with their evenings as we promised. I think there are so many things we could reflect on. We could take this conversation much deeper. I'm sure many of you wished you'd been up here having this conversation. I was a very lucky person to be sitting here. You've asked us to get along better. You've asked us to be full of love instead of hate. You've reminded us that this is all about cooperation. You've told us not to think of the SDGs as just a nice set of ideas, but make it possible. You've asked us to think about our locuses of influence, the city, our households, all the way up to the world. You've taken us on the most extraordinary erudite education with economics, history, politics, and all of that in just an hour and a half with us this evening. It's an extraordinary thing that you do. I think you are one of those leaders that we yearn for and that we were trying to describe earlier, that is in the world, helping us all be better people. So thank you, Jeffrey Sachs. Would you all please thank Jeffrey Sachs for this evening?
Thank you.